Like many people, I think I have like a fairly complicated relationship with Call of Duty as a franchise. So I am 25, meaning that because I've played like shooting games all my life, I grew up on like Xbox Live, Modern Warfare lobbies, or like World at War, or Modern Warfare 2, and those types of games. So it's something that has like always been in my life since I've been playing like online games. And I've always been like relatively a big fan, especially about like 10 years ago, 8 years ago. I feel like recently it's just kind of like ruining itself by how much microtransactions and other stuff they just stuff in there. I think it's really exploitative. I'm not really going to talk about the multiplayer today, but generally I've always liked it, but I've made videos in the past, you guys may have watched them, one's about 2 and a bit years old, about the politics of the series as a whole. Now, because more than like 2 different studios actually make these games, the politics kind of vary. So like Modern Warfare 2's politics are like okay, Modern Warfare 1s are bad, the Black Ops games ones are really, really bad, especially the first Black Ops games, but generally as like a kid I did enjoy these campaigns. Now, I actually made a review of Black Ops Cold War last year, just talking about the politics of the campaign, and I was actually quite surprised it wasn't just like straight CIA propaganda. It was actually like fairly complicated, and if you haven't played that by now, I assume you don't care about the spoilers, so spoilers for that game, you can actually side with the USSR at the end because you've actually been brainwashed by MK Ultra to work with the CIA because you actually used to work for the Soviet bloc. So I thought that was a nice twist. I just like shedding some light about how manipulative the CIA is. There is also some effort to like humanize the Soviet Union a bit in the KGB headquarters where you can listen to civilians talk about their holidays in like Poland or just like have general conversations about stuff.
Have you ever been to Poland, Yuri?
Yes, on a trip with Helena and the kids. We went up to the coast. Nice. Not too cold.
Ah, fun. Did you get to swim up there?
We swam quite a bit. In fact, we were stationed at Kaliningrad for a couple of years. We enjoyed the Baltic Sea.
I hear the Poles have good beer and terrible food.
That sounds about right. The beer is exceptional.
So I thought that was a nice touch. But I'm happy enough to report that Call of Duty Vanguard, maybe because of its setting, is really not right-wing at all. In fact, I would say it's fairly progressive, left-wing even in some instances, and liberal in other ways. Because as a reference point, if I'm thinking about Battlefield 5 and the German campaign in that, which I've also made a video on, which is essentially like a WEHRABOOS dream about like the honourable Wehrmacht, the honourable German tank commander and his crew. No mention of Nazism, no mention of Hitler, no mention of any of that stuff, even during the final days of the Second World War. And when you've played Vanguard, it seems even more bizarre because it takes place in a very similar setting. So today, what I want to talk about is the fairly left-wing politics of Vanguard. I'm going to go through the various different things it tackles, and then I'm also going to go through my problems with the game, in that as much as I appreciate the politics of this game, I do think there are both some missed opportunities and a bit of revisionist history in terms of how Allied soldiers might view racial minorities, because I feel like while trying to contrast the Allies with the Axis, it does a bit of a disservice, especially as we get further away from the war, in making us think about the problems with the Allied soldiers, specifically how white Allied soldiers often treated non-white Allied soldiers. So we're going to get into all of that today. Before we go any further, I want to plug my Patreon and social media for about a minute, so there are timestamps in the description. Skip that stuff if you're not interested. A lot of my work on this channel is demonetized because when you're covering more serious, sometimes edgier topics, YouTube doesn't like this. So if you've ever enjoyed my work, please consider becoming a patron. And you don't have to pledge a crazy amount. I want to build up my Patreon based on as many people as possible pledging little amounts, like $1 or $2. So if you feel like I have ever brought anything that's worthwhile into your life and my content, please really consider becoming a patron to help me continue to do this regardless of if YouTube monetize or not most of my videos in a given month. Also, if you want to join our communities, come check out our Discord and my subreddit. Those links in the description. And if you want to follow me personally, please check out the Kavernacle at Twitter, at Instagram, and also my personal Reddit, where you can keep up to date with all my content and what I'm doing. If you don't know, for every 5k we get a new chocolate orange. We now have 50k. Look at that complete pyramid. Help me keep building this for as long as possible. Like, can you imagine it like taking over the entire backdrop? But that would be nice. I also usually live stream on a Tuesday and a Thursday, and that stuff is archived on the Kavernacle Extra, my second channel. So I've written out like a long list of notes on my phone, so apologies if you do catch me glancing down at them just to prompt me and stuff like that. But basically, I guess I'll give you the setup of Vanguard. And of course, this video is going to have big spoilers for the campaign. If you care about that stuff, please stop watching. Don't care, then let's go. So basically in the campaign, you play as like a special forces team under the command of the British SOE in the final days of World War II, and you're on a secret mission. This is how the game opens. And basically, like, most allied nations are represented. So you have an Australian guy, you have 2 British people, you also have an American, and you have someone from the Soviet Union. Now on this first mission, you're playing as someone else, and I don't know what their nationality is. But what happens is you get captured by these German soldiers, and the player character dies, but then the rest of them are put in confinement in Berlin. And basically how it plays out is each person gets like interrogated, and that prompts like a flashback of what they did leading up to this moment. And the undertones is this one German guy called Freisinger is trying to basically become the new Führer and start the Fourth Reich, and you have to put a stop to that. So something I really like about this game, and I'll probably spend most of the time on the video on this, is how the game tackles racism. Now, I'm not saying this is like the best depiction of this time period's racism, or even something that is particularly like profound, but I think it says a lot that this made me appreciate the game like far more. And I think that's a bit of an indictment generally about World War II games in the gaming industry, because when I think about films, I have so much to watch, or so many documentaries to watch, that deal with very complex issues of World War II. But when it comes to the games, both sides are very sanitized, and even the Germans are very sanitized, which is a problem. But this game isn't sanitized in this regard. It makes it very clear what the Nazis generally believed and how they viewed most people as like subhuman, and I really appreciate that. This starts like in the first level. So I'm going to get to this guy in my criticism bit, but Arthur Kingsley is a black British soldier, and he's your commander. Now, this might seem kind of weird for the time, but it's something the Germans pick up on. So when you're captured by this Freisinger guy in the first level, he brings this up a lot. He's like, you have black soldiers now leading white soldiers.
An eye for a tongue. Australia. And also you.
Get on with it.
How delightful. You think you're British?
A Cambridge man, through and through.
So, you know better than to ruin a man's evening. Beethoven's Forza Sonata has exquisite but demanding passages that deserve my full attention. Unlike you. Does he give orders in English too? And do you follow them?
Now, Arthur knows how fragile this German is, so he even brings up that French colonial troops were stationed in German territory after World War I and often had relationships with the women there.
Spricht auch Deutsch! Please, proceed.
Your Rhineland accent. You must be from Neustadt. During the occupation, you saw French soldiers who looked like me carry guns in your streets. Marry your women. That's what I hear when you speak German.
charming.
But it's very clear from the get-go this game isn't going to like sanitize the Germans at all. Nothing like Battlefield, which never mentions any of this stuff. Like, it's really bizarre how much it sanitizes the Germans, like a WEHRABOOS wet dream. But something I really appreciate about this game, and it's only a little touch and it will go over most people's heads, I'm sure, but something it does very effectively is link the Nazi ideology to American racism. If you guys don't know, the American legal system and the racist laws it had broadly inspired the Nazis' own laws, and they looked to America as an example to follow. Obviously probably not taught to you in American schools, but it's there. Now, basically what happens in one of these interrogation scenes, by the guy who plays Merry in Lord of the Rings, is it Dominic Monaghan? He references someone who was very influential on the top echelons of US government, including presidents like Theodore Roosevelt, in their views on race. And this person was called Madison Grant. Now, in this scene, he also says that Madison Grant's theory is African Americans can take more pain. And this is actually a perception that has gone on till present day in America, and probably other countries as well, is that minorities often have higher pain thresholds. And in this scene, he puts a cigarette out on Arthur.
I have spoken with the Führer on exactly one occasion. He recommended a book to me, The Passing of the Great Race, by an American, a man named Madison Grant. The Führer had nothing but praise for him.
Madison Grant, and everyone like him.
The book reveals that under extreme duress or unfavorable conditions, your people do not deteriorate so easily.
In that moment, I knew what I had to do.
But it's a really small reference, but I appreciate it nonetheless. You know, we have a game like Battlefield 5, which omits all controversy. Like, we'll not talk about, you know, the Nazis, we'll not talk about racism, we'll not talk about anything like that. But here you have a game that even just subtly is linking them to the Americans. So who was Madison Grant? You guys might not know. I've heard about him a tiny bit when studying turn of the 20th century America, but here's a good article on Slate. So Madison Grant was the author of a 1916 book called The Passing of the Great Race, which spread the doctrine of race purity all over the globe. Grant's purportedly scientific argument that the exalted Nordic race that had founded America was in peril, and all of modern society's accomplishments along with it helped catalyze nativist legislators in Congress to pass comprehensive restrictionist immigration policies in the early 1920s. His book went on to become Adolf Hitler's Bible, as the Führer wrote to tell him. Grant's doctrine has since been rejuvenated and rebranded by his ideological descendants. Jews troubled Grant the most. The man of the old stock, he later wrote in The Passing of the Great Race, is being driven off the streets of New York City by the swarms of Polish Jews. But as the title of his 1916 work indicated, Grant's fear of depossession ran wide and deep. These immigrants adopt the language of the Native American. They wear his clothes, they steal his name, and they are beginning to take his women. But they seldom adopt his religion or understand his ideals. While he is being elbowed out of his own home, the American looks calmly abroad and urges on others ethics which are exterminating his own race. It was America that taught us a nation should not open its doors equally to all nations. Adolf Hitler told the New York Times half a decade later, just 1 year before his elevation to Chancellor in January 1933. Elsewhere, he admiringly noted that the US simply excludes the immigration of certain races. In these respects, America already pays obeisance, at least in tentative first steps to the characteristic Volkish conception of the state. Hitler and his followers were eager to claim a foreign American lineage for the Nazi mission. Grant's final project was an effort to organize a hunting expedition with Hermann Göring, the commander-in-chief of the Nazi Air Force, who went on to become Hitler's chosen successor. Grant died in May 1937, before the outing was to take place. And the article goes on to talk about how Grant influenced the views of Teddy Roosevelt, Warren Harding, and other US presidents. And like it said in the article, he influenced the passing of these xenophobic laws in America. So again, a little thing, but I appreciated it because I never really hear this in video games. You never really even hear it in mainstream like films and stuff that link these two ideologies together. It's a little line, it's a nice line. Maybe some people will be like, who was Madison Grant? You type him in, you find this article, and maybe you learn something. So that's a nice touch. So also, something else I liked was the depiction of the 93rd Infantry Division, which was a segregated African-American division that fought in the Pacific War. Now, in this level, Ashton Bougainville as your white American pilot, and these guys are sent to rescue you. Now, I like what they say in some of their dialogue, like Wade, the American character, says he hasn't heard of them, and he says, well, of course you haven't heard of us, like, you know, we're a black outfit.
Long way to go. Better than loading trucks, that's for damn sure.
Hey, you guys said you were 93rd. Never heard of it.
Bet you ain't never met a Negro before, neither. We ain't exactly in the credit-getting business.
Oh, colored regiment.
Yep. You see any snakes or centipedes? Let me know. We'll get the cookout ready.
I did like that, and I like that representation, and I like them even talking about their race, because you don't, again, hear that in these World War II games. So I appreciated that altogether, as, you know, although this campaign is only about like 3.5 hours long, I appreciated they went out of their way to do this. Now, I want to get into my criticisms of their depiction of this stuff as well. So I want to talk about Arthur Kingsley first, this black British soldier you would have seen on the box art. Now, it's kind of cool that he is inspired by a real person, so I just want to tell you about the real person quick. Funnily enough, this was actually written by someone I went to university with, and we worked on the same entertainment magazine. So Harrison Abbott writes, Call of Duty Vanguard actor on real-life war hero who inspired Arthur Kingsley. So there's very little information about Sergeant Cornell, who is Arthur Kingsley. As was sadly the case with many people of colour at the time, his accomplishments were largely glossed over and have been poorly documented from a historical perspective. What we do know is that he was a paratrooper in the 6th Airborne Division of the British Army, and that he was the first black man to drop in behind enemy lines on June 6, 1944. Still a private at this point, he served as a company runner and was tasked with delivering messages between military outposts after the battalion's radio communications failed. This was obviously an extremely dangerous undertaking, one that he performed for 5 weeks of continuous action. According to his distinguished conduct citation, Cornell repeatedly carried messages through the most heavy and accurate enemy mortar and machine gun fire. In the process, he sustained numerous injuries and was badly wounded on 4 occasions, yet he still persevered and completed every single mission that was assigned to him. Of this, the commendation says, many acts of gallantry were performed by members of the battalion, but for sustained courage, nothing surpassed Cornell's efforts. In another memorable incident, Cornell accompanied Major Roger Neal to smoke out an enemy sniper, who had found an vantage point in a nearby orchard. Together, the pair stealthily made their way into the hedge and took out the marksman despite taking heavy fire themselves. In recognition of his bravery throughout the entire Normandy campaign, Cornell was swiftly promoted to the rank of sergeant and took on a leadership position. Just under a year later, he was unfortunately killed in action in Germany, along with 27 others in the battalion. These casualties occurred as the men were capturing the Neustadt Bridge, only for the structure to be blown up by a German garrison. Cornell was tragically only 29 years old at the time. He was well known and respected among the division after becoming the battalion boxing champion. His father was an American acrobat with the Barnum and Bailey Circus, which inspired the Hugh Jackman film The Greatest Showman, but ran away when the circus came to England. Sergeant Cornell grew up in Portsmouth with his parents and brother and 2 sisters before marrying his childhood sweetheart, Eileen, when she was 16 and he was 19. They had 2 sons together, and he joined the army when the war started. So again, I appreciate the touch of Arthur Kingsley being inspired by a real sergeant in the British paratroopers who fought from Normandy to Germany. And really, there aren't many visible black British soldiers in the war. Like, I was really digging deep when I was researching. I was like, what was the experience of black Brits during the war? And of course, there wasn't really many of them. But I want to get to 2 points here, is that a lot of people who fought for Britain never got recognised. They were actually paid less because they weren't white, and they've never been honoured properly. So the British Armed Forces did used to be generally segregated, but in 1939, the Barnett Group reports, as the need to win the war and avoid German victory and occupation outweighed concerns about race and integration, many black volunteers from West Africa and the Caribbean were still being rejected by the RAF. However, this changed after the Battle of Britain in 1940. In 1941, 250 Trinidadians were accepted into the RAF and made the journey to Britain, and black servicemen also went on to help bolster the numbers of the Army and the Royal Navy. By the end of the war in the RAF, there were over 17,000 male and female volunteers from the West Indies. Although it seems like slow progress was being made in Britain, when the fighting was over, Britain sent many black soldiers home with an end-of-war bonus that was roughly a third of the reward given to their white counterparts. And just an interesting point, it says here, during the war, black people were still a rare sight in Britain. The racism they encountered was minimal, but that soon changed in the post-war years. While the rest of Britain set about building a country fit for heroes, black people found that the country for which they had fought was denying them access to equal jobs and accommodation. A report recently, Africans who fought for British Army paid less than white soldiers. more than 500,000 black African soldiers who fought for the British Army during the Second World War were paid up to 3 times less than their white counterparts, a newly unearthed document has revealed. The document buried in Britain's National Archives reveals how the government systematically discriminated against African soldiers, paying white personnel, even those living in African colonies and serving alongside the African soldiers in British colonial units, far more than their black counterparts. And here you can see the list where it talks about different ethnicities being paid differently. So Arthur is clearly like this heroic figure based on a heroic guy, but generally the experience of black servicemen in the British Army was a negative one. And that goes to my other point, in that I have to suspend my disbelief a bit that if you're having a squad filled with an Australian, an American, a Russian, and another British guy, that all of them are totally okay being commanded by a black soldier. And this extends also to Wade being shot down in the Pacific and being commanded by black soldiers as well. Because I made a video about the Battle of Bamber Bridge where black GIs from America had a fight with white MPs in the American army, but generally Britain treated the African American GIs very, very well. Like I said in that article, generally racism against black people in Britain at the time wasn't very overt because not many black people lived there. The racism really came with the Windrush generation and loads of people migrating to Britain after the war, where these people saw them as like a threat to like the white race or just, you know, British culture and all that stuff. But again, I think it would have been an interesting touch if at least maybe one of these soldiers wasn't totally comfortable being ordered around by a black soldier. So even if we say, like, you know, for the Russian lady, because she's from the Soviet Union and in theory they believed all races were equal and stuff like that in communism, then let's take her out of the equation, although the Soviet Union definitely had problems with anti-black racism as well. But I do find it hard out of, you know, an Australian, an American and a British guy that all of them would be totally okay with this. And I say that a lot more for the Australian and especially the American guy as well.
I know why you chose to cooperate. I would not take orders from it easy.
You got it all wrong, mate.
I don't follow.
I don't care what colour his skin is. Haven't you heard about the Aussies and the Brits?
Where America explicitly still had a segregated armed forces. Now, in the Pacific campaign, he seems to be uncomfortable with being ordered around, not because these soldiers are black, but because he's a pilot and he doesn't want to die as like an infantryman.
You're gonna help Private Howard get to that wire. And then you're gonna keep him covered on the other side. Understood?
Look, in the sky, I'm your man. But this, I'm not the die face down in the mud type.
Then you shouldn't have got yourself shot down. There's a difference between suicide and sacrifice. You do well to learn it.
But again, I think it would have been a nice point if there was a little bit of tension between him and the black GIs, or maybe even him and Arthur. Like, could they have taken one of these characters and not made him like a totally stereotypical hero, nice guy who hates the Germans and is anti-racist and stuff like that? Because they talk about Madison Grant. Madison Grant inspired like the top Congress people, the top presidents, politicians, and we have a representative of the American military, but he seems not to share any of his sentiment. Because even by today's standards, even like a more like liberal, tolerant person back then probably would shock us with their views on race. And it gets to my general points that like Arthur talks a lot about like racism and people being racist, like it's exclusive to the Germans. And I think it could have been interesting with him being this black British soldier, maybe talking about a bit more what it's like to fight for like this white country that probably hasn't ever treated you that well, and certainly does not treat black people well in their global empire. I don't mind making World War II a bit of like good versus evil, but this game clearly goes for a bit more nuance. I am just a bit annoyed that maybe it didn't go far enough, in that if you're going to talk about Madison Grant, maybe talk about a bit more that not all these Allied soldiers are perfect human beings that seem to believe in the racial equality we have in 2021 in 1945. So that's my criticism, but shifting away from that, something I also like is that they humanize the USSR, and actually Paulina's campaign, played by Laura Bailey, who also plays Abby, and I think Wade actually plays Abby's father in The Last of Us, so 2 Last of Us actors here as well. But her story is given the most time in the campaign, and you actually see like members of her family. So something I really appreciate is like she starts off as a nurse, and in her flashback scene, you're eating dinner at the table with your father and your brother, and the dad is actually played by the landlord in the Tobey Maguire Spider-Mans. I've never seen him in anything else, so that's quite funny. And just generally they're having like a normal conversation. He has like an average apartment. Maybe there's like a little reference to like Soviet authoritarianism, but I don't feel like the game is really even criticizing this system.
What you got there? Empty bottles?
I'm training fresh partisans.
Our comrades already know how to drink.
These will be Molotovs soon.
Is it wise to give explosives to civilians?
Pasha, you worry too much.
Но тебе нет.
Ouch, сеструха, that hurts.
You did that well enough yourself.
Топлячка.
Дурень.
Лягушка.
Козёл.
Шаба.
Say both of you.
I'm going to be late.
Sit! Now there. Isn't that nice? A real family breakfast.
Bombs and bullets. Best way to start the day.
You know, you're gonna get yourself killed having that old rifle in the house, Papasha.
Now who is worried too much?
So, the Germans are approaching the front line. Is that where you're off to?
No, they told me that's not where I'd be the most useful, so... I'm training recruits at the old post office.
Must be nice.
Yeah, it would have been nice to have a choice in the matter.
At least you get to
Oh,
fight.
don't tell me at least, you?
Watch it! You're both doing your part.
There are some like statues of like Stalin around, but generally you can walk around the environment, you can greet people, you can overhear conversations, people talking about the war, people just talking about what life's like in Stalingrad, people just talking about like general problems and stuff.
Morning.
Save some of our men today, huh?
I will. Something smells good over here.
Oh, Paulina, I saved a loaf for your family.
Spasibo.
You're welcome. Your father has been bothering you for some Borodinsk.
Of course he has. I'll come by and grab it later.
Be safe at work, Paulina.
Good morning.
Morning, Paulina. How is your father's leg?
Finally improving. Thanks.
And it's nice to get this humanization because the only Western film about the Soviets I've watched is like Enemy at the Gates, and although it's like a decent film, it plays into a lot of tropes about like Asiatic hordes of the Soviet Union. It's a very like Western view of them, where I feel like this doesn't try and do this. It's just like the Soviets were the good guys too. The Soviets pretty much did the most fighting against the Germans. We're not going to downplay that. And here they are as normal people.
Had the city fallen, Russia would have crumbled. The Germans underestimated Russia's will to survive. They underestimated the city and her defenders.
And the father and the brother seem like nice people as well. The father is a veteran and he has like a Mosin Nagant sniper rifle, which you eventually get. And you're basically avenging your family's eventual deaths as well. And Paulina is like the heart of the anti-fascism, which I appreciate as well as someone who's from the Soviet Union who is hurt most by this. Family destroyed, country destroyed. And I like that they center her, and she's so unapologetic about hating the Nazis as well.
Do we understand the plan?
I shoot Nazis. They die. That's my plan. Everyone I love is dead. And the only time I feel anything is when I watch a German beg for his life. So, I am exactly where I need to be.
But I also do like a little reference to the Nazis actually viewing the Russians as subhuman. I believe Freisinger, when the Russians are taking over Berlin, calls them like Russian filth.
It saddens me to see the fatherland defiled by filthy Russians, no less.
Linking that to like the ending of the game and the themes of the game, it very much is like an FU to fascism and the Nazis. Like I said, I really appreciate that. Arthur specifically and Paulina are the ones who talk about this the most, how much they hate the Nazis, how much they hate these racist people, how much they just want to kill all of them, essentially. But I also really, really like the ending of this game and how these characters who really, really do not like fascists react. So basically, at the end of the game, they capture Freisinger alive. Now, I'm going to play you his speech, and then I'm going to talk about it, and then I'm going to talk about how they deal with it.
It's over!
You cannot kill me.
And yet here we are.
And even the Allies would leave their decision to inferiors such as yourself.
We need him alive, boss. The intel he's got's what we came for. Hey, shoot him or bring him. I'm starting this plane.
He'll never talk.
Get up!
Your nations will make sure I'm well taken care of. As payment for my cooperation. Peaceful new beginning. Life of American luxury. Might suit me. Perhaps I might even start a new family.
So I really, really like that speech because he's saying, you know, turn me over to the Americans. I don't care. A life of luxury might suit me. And why I like that so much is because that happened to so many Nazis and so many Germans. They collaborated with the Americans, they gave them information about stuff, they either helped them on like NASA and rocket projects, and they were given new identities, and they were allowed to live in America as American citizens. And people as bad as this guy were let off. Others were put in the West German government or the West German military. Others were given positions at NATO. So I like this game even referencing that stuff, saying that like these people were not held accountable. A lot of them weren't. And if you don't know about this stuff, hopefully you'll also go research this stuff. Like, you know, what was this guy talking about? Like, surely he'd go be tried for war crimes, but as history tells us, especially on the western side of the conflict, this didn't really happen. Most Germans who did awful stuff in the war, or most people who collaborated with them, got off. Countries like West Germany, countries like Greece, they're perfect examples of where these guys did awful things and they suffered no consequences. Not only that, they were rewarded for being anti-communist and put in post-war governments. Also happened in Japan as well. But the gang are not going to let him get away with this. He isn't going to experience his lovely American life of luxury. This is how they respond to it.
As for you, there is no starting over. This is your new beginning. Fascistkaya Svinya.
You even know who I am! The value I can provide!
You're not worth it.
Suppose that's it then.
Let's get out of here.
So I feel like with that ending, the general message of the game is like, this is how you deal with fascists and fascism. It's not through compromise. It's not through appeasing them or trying to change them or maybe like using their skills for yourself. This is the answer. This is how the war was won. This is how the Nuremberg trials should have been carried out. And I like that so much. And it's like, yeah, we're not going to capture you. We're not going to take you alive. And he's like so annoyed by this because he thinks that's what's going to happen. And loads of Germans fled from the Eastern Front to the Western Front so they could be captured by the Americans for this very reason. Because the Soviets did have revenge on their mind, just like Paulina, she's a good representative of them. They were extremely brutal when dealing with the Germans because of how brutal the Germans had been on them. So for my problems with the black and whiteness of the morality, I do appreciate them going like fully in on this theme right at the end and just being like, yeah, this is how you do it. So generally, I just like really appreciate this campaign touching on a lot of these themes. It's Call of Duty. It's not like really philosophical. It's not like really, really deep or anything like that. But just like including a lot of this stuff, I think is big for like a massive franchise, like literally the most popular game on earth. And hopefully people who play this might become more interested in World War II, but also would become more interested in a lot of the things it touches on if they're more like politically or historically minded, because I feel like it does a good job in saying like, yeah, remember these guys, the Nazis, they were actually really bad. The Allies weren't perfect either, and America wasn't perfect. It did have links to this awful pseudoscience, but I do appreciate them also like having like Arthur Kingsley and the 93rd Division as well. But my criticisms mainly stem from like the more like, I guess, like liberal version of World War II, where there's nothing really wrong with the Allied soldiers themselves. There's also some other fun themes that I didn't really touch on. So there's also a bit of like Australian-British tension.
Haven't you heard about the Aussies and the Brits? We were the pieces of shit flushed down the Crown's dunny.
Yes, yes, of course, but your nations are allies.
No, it was more like master-servant. I did what I did because to every Brit, folks like me are expendable.
Because of course, when Australia was founded as a colony, like over 100,000 British convicts were sent there for like minor crimes usually, and they became like a large percentage of the population. But because of its history, there's been a feeling that Australians have never been treated fairly by the British despite joining them in these wars. So I like the tension between the Australians in the campaign, which ends with your character actually punching the incompetent British major at the end of the level.
Sometimes, the only way to honor a fallen soldier is to finish the mission. But try remembering that while their blood stains your boots. That's what I told Lucas when we first met. War had taught us both that lesson. The rigid hierarchy of Allied command would look at Lucas and see only character flaws. Insubordinate, churlish, no stranger to a prison cell. He was perfect for my team. Even if he does have a mean right hook.
So like another interesting wrinkle in World War II. But yeah, like I said, overall, really appreciate this game. I think it's like on the level of like World at War in terms of just like being good at showing you a historical event, whereas like Black Ops is like one of the worst representations of the Vietnam War I can like really remember, definitely in video games. It literally is just like glorifying the CIA and seems to take all its inspiration from how much the Deer Hunter dehumanized the Vietnamese and made them look like the bad guys in the war and the Americans look like the good guys. But yes, generally, World War II games, more of this please, less of Battlefield 5. I don't want two sides, I don't want the omission of all the awful stuff that the Germans did. I don't want WEHRABOOS propaganda in my games that people will love, and I've had so much criticism on my Battlefield videos talking about this stuff because so many people have a revisionist history of the war that German soldiers were honourable, German soldiers were just fighting for their country, and the Wehrmacht didn't do anything wrong. Where I'm happy in this game, it really makes no distinction. It's like, you're Germans fighting for the Nazis, therefore you are also Nazis. I don't want the honourable tank commander in the final days of World War II. Let me know what you guys think of the campaign if you've played it. Let me know what you guys thought of the video. If you want to follow me on social media, at the Kavernacle on Twitter and Instagram. If you want to join our communities, check out my Discord and check out my Patreon. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.